Welcome back, world builders. We're going to carry on where we left off in part 1. Last time we covered media that you're interested in and what things we can pull from that media to create your own world. We examined different species and what their places in this world might be, what they might look like, and how they might have impacted the world. The next thing to think about is technology. Is there technology, for a start, that we would call electrical or anything like that? Is there steam technology, or are we in a purely medieval high fantasy setting? All of this is okay, depending on what you like. This could be anything from Conan the Barbarian, almost a Stone Age level society, to swords and sorcery. And don't forget that using these rules, using the rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, you can make a sci-fi setting. It's not too far away. There are rules in the back for guns and laser weapons, grenades, scatter damage from machine guns, jetpacks, all this kind of stuff, so you are not limited. Do you want to play fast and loose with the rules when it comes to time and technology? You don't feel like justifying yourself when it comes to why all of this stuff exists? That's totally fine too. Think about the Adventure Zone, an absolutely brilliant setting, an absolutely brilliant adventure. If you haven't listened to it or watched it or seen any of the art for it, please definitely do. It's a really interesting take on D&D. Far more like the kind of games that I used to play when I was younger, where the story is absolutely dominant over world building. And what that means is you might start in a high fantasy setting, but then your characters would get in a car and then they drive to a massive city that's like something out of Blade Runner, where all the neon signs are used and fueled via magic, only to then go to a dungeon where there's a castle and you fight a vampire who's been watching your approach on television screens. His escape method while you're fighting him with sword and magic is to use an elevator, to use a lift to get down to a chariot that he drives straight into an aeroplane, and who knows what else. You don't have to remove the fantasy feeling from a sci-fi game either. If you're a fan of Geek and Sundry, you might have seen their playthrough of the first adventure for Titan's Grave, Ashes of Volcana, which again is a really amazing one. There are orcs and goblins and elves, humans, what have you, in a sci-fi setting that ties magic straight into the future. So if you love a lot of conflicting ideas, it's only just a matter of time before you think how the two of them connect. And you're already building a world. If you think about how they connect, then there's a reason why that happened, and you're getting into lore, you're getting into the history of your own world, and thinking about how that might shape travel, other species, the economy, all that kind of stuff. You might want to have tiny hidden elements of technology in an otherwise fantasy world. In the campaign setting that I'm playing in right now, for example, it's a totally medieval world, absolutely medieval, but we find magic items. What we believe to be magic is actually futuristic technology from the people who lived on this planet before we propagated ourselves, before we evolved. Think about Warhammer 40,000 as well, with tech priests from Mars who believe that ancient technology is something to be revered and worshipped. Their bolt-action rifles and chainswords are essentially their +1 magic items. They're sophisticated, still working piece of technology from an entirely different generation that operated on a much higher level than society has devolved down to now. We have no memories or history of what it was like beforehand, but we revere these artifacts that could take the place of magic items. So technology is not just a straight road. You can always go back on yourself and have little elements of it strewn throughout the world as little mysteries for your friends and players to pick up on as they play. The next thing to think about is maps and exploration. What I mean is, has your world been explored before? Are there methods of travel across it? And are there maps that are readily available? If you or I want to travel to, let's say, America or Europe, what have you, we know exactly where those places are. We can get on a flight, we can go there, we can even see mid-flight exactly where our plane is across the world. Things like World of Warcraft have a system like this. You have an adventurer's map that will show you exactly where you need to go. It develops and unfolds as you go, but you know roughly where you're headed to. You know how to fly from Orgrimmar to Ashenvale, how to get from Stormwind City to Silithis if you so fancy, or even teleport through the dark portal to another world. Is it not common knowledge? Is the world not explored? Think about Conan. Stepping outside of the confines of a nice, safe, protected city is tantamount to death. If you think about the random encounters rules for D&D, then this is kind of more what the game is geared towards. A simple peasant with no crazy stats like adventurers might have would wander into the woods and be attacked by wolves or something like that. It might be a barren landscape outside. The elements alone could be enough to kill someone, and as a result it's never been charted, it's never been plotted, people don't know their way to the next big city. They feel like they're stranded in the middle of a desert of the unknown. Is that the case if you're in a sci-fi game? Maybe your planet or space station is the only one that you know exists. You could maybe map your way around that in its entirety, but as soon as you set forth into the vast emptiness of space, you have no idea where you're going in specific. How was this world explored if it was? Can your players be the people to do that? Are they writing maps as they go? Is that the main point of their adventure? Have another band of adventurers done this recently before them? Or is this ancient arcane knowledge handed down throughout the generations? Someone managed to do it by inventing an automobile or on horseback. Maybe there are trains scouring the landscape that make it easy to traverse from point A to point B. Maybe this knowledge was handed down not by mere mortals, but by wizards, scholars, or gods who have informed the people living on their planet that this is exactly how it operates. How reliable is that information? If something as fallible as a human sketched out a map, do we really think that it might be accurate? Do we really know if that's the case? Or if a map handed to you by a deity explains that this is exactly how far you have to go to find the next town, and it turns out not to be quite right, what does that say about the gods? Are they also human? Can they get things wrong? More things to think about. On that note of gods, do you have gods in your world? Interestingly, I tried to force this down my players' throats recently and set them in a world where gods absolutely, provably did exist and created life on this planet. My players chose that they were not going to be believers anyway, even though they were tangible facts, and it made a lot of encounters really awkward. Maybe gauge with your player base whether or not you should include gods if they can't imagine a world where life didn't evolve. If they don't exist, is there any evidence in the form of creatures that might show evolutionary ties? We know how humans evolved, but what about elves? Maybe they evolved from a different ancestor. Maybe they're distantly related to humans as they have the same number of fingers, appendages, all this kind of stuff. They're variants. Maybe they're the next step in evolution for humankind, a different variant that split off from a distant cousin. Something like that. For example, in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, we know that orcs are corrupted elves that have changed over time. It may not be evolution as we know it, as this caused a change in living elves, but it is a change, and it helps to explain where things came from if they weren't created in this fantasy world. But presuming that there are gods in your world, or maybe one god, who knows, however you want to work around it, do people know about them? Will people have met them? Or is this just for the precious few? Are they written about in books? Or can you go and visit these gods? Are they mysterious and benevolent? Or are they capricious and more like just powerful people with people's desires, kind of more like Greek mythology, more akin to a king or a queen than they are to some ethereal force? If gods do exist, how did they come about? Were they created by an elder race of gods, pre-gods? Did they evolve? Were they once adventurers who became so powerful that they ascended to godhood? In which case, who made that decision? In the campaign setting that I was talking about earlier, the one that I was talking about elves, and where deities unequivocally did create life on this weird planet, I kind of went for a blend, in that the whole theme for the setting was that some sort of massive horrible force was coming to end the universe, and this is not the first time this has happened. I explained gods as the only creatures that had managed to survive a previous destruction of the universe, and they had been infused with all the magic of that previous universe, turning them into a god. When they arrived in this universe that it exploded and expanded again, they used their magical powers to each create a race, to safeguard some mysterious secret that might save this universe from being destroyed. And that's where my adventure basically began, towards the end of another one of these cycles. Anyway, that's enough for part 2. Thank you so much for joining me again. I'm really enjoying this series. Make sure to keep an eye out for part 3. And until then, make sure to leave a little thumbs up down below, and I'll see you next time.